Hello and welcome to this video tutorial for Creo Parametric version 3. In this tutorial, we'll cover the use of the sketching palette. As is good practice, we'll start by making centerlines. We will select the centerline tool, click once. Notice that Creo often snaps these constraints. Sometimes they're helpful and they get them right, other times it's not so helpful. We'll align this vertically. Click twice to complete that centerline, and we'll repeat the same process for the second centerline. Clicking twice, and then middle click to complete. We'll now have a more detailed look at some of our drawing options. A tab that you may have discovered, even if accidentally, is the construction mode. If we select it, any lines or features we draw will be dashed lines, and they won't actually appear in the extrusion. For example, we can make a reference line, middle click to finish, and it will be rendered as a dashed line. If we turn construction mode off, we can then align other features off that construction line. We can then change the dimensions, and those features will relocate. So construction mode can be useful for locating multiple features. If we've made a feature that we don't want, there are several ways of deleting this. The first is by drag selecting the feature, pressing delete. Another option is simply by clicking the geometry, pressing delete. Or the third option is the delete segment tool up the top here. You can click that delete segment tool, click our feature, and it will delete. Middle click once we're done. We can then remove this construction line by selecting and deleting it to free up the workspace. We can now have a look at some of the other drawing tools in order. One of the most commonly used drawing tool is the line tool. That can either be as a line chain or a tangent if we have two curves. So we can select our line chain and mouse click to start drawing. Once again, we notice Creo often adds these constraints. It tries to be clever and guess what we're doing. Sometimes these snap constraints can be helpful, other times they can be a bit annoying. But we can just keep drawing. You notice it's defaulting to horizontal and vertical constraints. Middle click to complete. Now it does look a bit of a mess with these weak constraints and weak dimensions. Don't worry about those for the moment. The most important thing to note is this feature is not complete. So it isn't shaded yellow, and we have two red dots indicating the section isn't closed, and we could not extrude this. So we can complete that with the line tool. And now this feature is complete and can be extruded. But we can delete this for the time being. Another commonly used tool is the rectangle tool. So typically that's selected, you select the first vertex, then the second. Note these horizontal and vertical constraints that Creo's put in. We can also draw a slanted rectangle, for example. These constraints indicate lines are parallel to one another. Or in another method, we can make a parallelogram. And middle click to complete. Once again, none of these objects are shaded yellow because we actually have two enclosed sections. So we can tidy this up with the delete segment tool. Another way to use this is similar to a paintbrush. So we can mouse click and drag and delete any features. And then middle click to complete. We can delete this whole shape for the time being. Delete. And have a look at the circle tool. There are several methods of drawing circles. The most convenient one is normally the center and an outside point. So we know our origin. We can click once and then drag to make our circle, clicking a second time. Another method is via choosing 3 points. 1, 2, 3. Middle click to complete. And then we can demonstrate our line tool with the line tangent functionality. So we can select 2 curves, circles in this case, and it will put a line tangent between the 2. We can delete this to tidy it up. Continuing with this, we can demonstrate the arc tool. This is quite useful for producing rounded edges. For example, if we had a rectangle, we can select the arc tool using center and ends. Now if we hover about the midpoint, an M will be displayed, indicating that's the midpoint of this edge. We can click once and a construction line will appear. We can click twice and a third time middle clicking to complete that. We can then use our delete segment tool to tidy up that edge. Middle click. We could do the same thing with the circle tool, center and point, find the midpoint, drag to the extremity, mouse click, and middle click. And then we can tidy that up. So we have the same result as a rounded edge, but it's been demonstrated by 2 different methods. Moving on, we can delete this object and have a look at the ellipse tool. We can specify our outer extremities and then a thickness. Creo gives us these default weak dimensions, which we can later change. We can also use the spline tool. In this tool, the user specifies a series of points. This can be quite a complex tool to control within Creo and is rarely used for a lot of these applications. If we tidy up our workspace again, we can include features like text by specifying the height. Okay, this text is flipped, but you get the idea. You can include brand names or product names on your part. So the final tool that we'll look at is our offset tool. So if we draw a spline or have an existing feature, we can offset that by a certain distance. By selecting offset, selecting our offset or entering our offset distance, pressing OK, and we can see a second curve has been offset about that distance. One last thing to note before we end this demonstration on sketching is there is a palette tool that exists up the top. If we click that, we're presented with a series of preloaded shapes. So this can be useful if you want to make some more complex or less common shapes. So we can scroll down. We can choose, for example, an 8-sided octagon. We can drop and drag that into our workspace. We can then scale that or move it around and lock it to other features. There's also other shapes or profiles like structural steel profiles, various shapes, and stars. But these are rarely used for drawing. So as you can see, there are many ways to make certain shapes in sketch mode. A good process for the workflow is starting with simple shapes like rectangles, circles, arcs, and lines, adding those together, and then modifying those with the Delete Segment tool to arrive at your required geometry. At this point, I suggest the user to basically have a play, to enter sketch mode, and to experiment with each of those tools to see what they can achieve.